All right, so my name is Stephen Myers. I'm an assistant professor of specialty crop weed science in the Department of Horticulture and Landscape Architecture at Purdue University. Yeah, so as a weed scientist, we make things really complicated, but the most simple definition of a weed is that it's simply a plant that's growing where we don't want it to be, a plant out of place. I also like to add a second definition that's credited to Ralph Waldo Emerson, which is that a weed is a plant whose virtues have yet to be discovered, and I like to add to that, or a plant whose virtues have been forgotten. Yeah, so to some extent weeds are inevitable, right? They're all around us. They spread by wind and water and animals, but we can do a few things to help ourselves get an edge against weeds. One is to make sure that the inputs that we use in our gardens are relatively weed-free. So if we buy seed for our yard, make sure that it comes from a reputable source and that on the label we have relatively few weeds and no noxious weeds, hopefully. Another thing we can do is if we use compost or topsoil, that kind of thing, make sure it comes from a reputable source and hopefully has a low level of weed seed in it. Other things we can do are to make sure we choose plant species and varieties that grow well in our area, because that gives them the best chance of growing lush and vigorous and hopefully outcompeting weeds in the area. So other things we can do are to increase our plant density, so add more plants into a space, avoid large open spaces where weeds can kind of grow without competing with our flowers or our vegetable plants, and then use a mulch. And a lot of times that's going to be an organic mulch, so things like straw or bark mulches are really useful in home garden situations to suppress weeds as well. So the proper way to remove a weed is to try to get as much of the weed as you can. So for a lot of our annual weeds, that's simply just grabbing the weed at the base of the plant near the soil surface, pulling it up or hoeing it if you have a hoe that you'd rather use, and just trying to make sure that the weed's roots have no adhering dirt, remove as much dirt as possible. If the weeds have started to produce seed, you want to take that out of the garden so that we don't have that seed fall in the soil and become a problem later on. So it's important to know that some herbicides, for example, only control grasses, right? So those can usually be used around broadleaf plants, but you wouldn't want to use them around grasses or they can be injurious. Some herbicides are what we call broad spectrum, and they'll essentially injure or kill any plants that they come in contact with. Those can be used safely around the base of plants or when you prepare a site, but if you get them on your desirable plants, your flowers, your vegetables, you will probably see injury and maybe crop death, and that's not a good thing. Yeah, I think the best thing we can do is read and follow the label. That's really important. We tell that to our home gardeners, but we also tell it to our commercial vegetable and producers as well. The other things are to follow the proper personal protective equipment, so PPE. We all should be familiar with that term by now, but making sure that when we apply herbicides, whether they're synthetic or natural products, that we have the right personal protective equipment, whether that's eye protection or gloves or chemical resistant boots. The number of times I've seen people spraying weeds in their yards with shorts and and flip-flops is too high, so we don't want to do that.